welcome to our debut episode of a new podcast called Riding Backroads. I'm Keith Hayes, and this is Steve Hood. We're going to cover over various episodes, motorcycle culture, specifically here in Texas, talking about lifestyle and such. And being that we're hosting this show out of the Kent's Harley-Davidson shop here in Abilene, Texas, figured we'd go ahead and start off the debut episode talking a little history of Kent's Harley-Davidson, which has been serving the big country for, over 60 years.
61 years this past March.
This past March. So March the 16th was 1964 when it all started. Obviously you weren't involved at the time. I mean, you came a little bit later, but what was kind of the whole start of Kent's Harley-Davidson?
Nobody really knows for sure, exactly what it was. You talk to Rick, and Rick will tell you that he came home one day and told Kay, that was Kent's wife, told Kay he bought a motorcycle shop. So, but Kent was always a motorcycle enthusiast. He loved motorcycles from way back. You can see pictures of him. We've got several pictures on the wall here of him when the kids were little on 30s, 40s models, Harleys. He's always been just loved motorcycles. Two things that Kent loved was airplanes and motorcycles.
Really?
Yeah.
So was he a pilot?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Holy cow, man.
He ferried during World War II, he ferried planes for Boeing. He worked for Boeing.
Wow.
And he ferried the big bombers back and forth. So he flew a lot of hours in some of those airplanes, and then of course had his own private airplane.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that was real detrimental to him at the time was when he lost his pilot's license over medical. And he'd had multiple heart attacks.
Gotcha.
And several bypass surgeries, and he even went all the way up to Washington, D.C. to argue with him over it, but it didn't do him any good. But no, he loved motorcycles. That was one of the things he did. And I think the other part of it was he loved motorcycle people.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be successful in this business. You really have to not only love the motorcycles, but you got to love the people that come along with it.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a different crowd. Everything that we do, goes against pretty much the norm of what most people do, but everybody used to think motorcycles were real dangerous. Well, motorcycles aren't any more dangerous than the people that operate them or the people that are operating the automobiles around us.
Yeah.
We just don't have quite as much protection. But,
that's not true.
But, the people are the center pivot of what we do.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that allowed Kent to be able to live as long as he did. And I know, it makes a lot of difference where a lot of our customers and the like ours is we don't get old.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Mentally, a lot of people, when they get in their 60s, they hit retirement age and the like, and mentally they become old.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing that can happen to them in general. I'm in my 70s now, about the age Kent was when he called me to get together, but. I still don't feel like I'm that old. I look in the mirror and wonder who that old fart is looking back, but that's
well, you don't act you don't act that old. I mean, you make a valid point because it's motorcycles are like a fountain of youth because we've got people that come in even older than you, like Dudley.
We got guys in their 80s that are still riding, and we had up until recently we had a couple that were in their 90s.
Wow.
So there comes a time, I guess, with all of them that you feel that I can't hold the bike up, or that I'm not strong enough to handle a trike, or whatever the situation may be. But we've had several that one was 92 when he quit riding, and another one that was about the same age, 91. And we still have one customer. He doesn't ride his trike very often, but he's in his 90s that still has one, and he's still active. So.
Man, in my mid 50s, visualizing myself riding a motorcycle when first off, I'm not even sure I'll make it to 90. Probably won't even make it to 80, but
I understand that.
but yeah, that's crazy. And I'll tell you, it's for me, it really has been rejuvenating. Anytime I get on the motorcycle, you can kind of feel the youthfulness come out when you're on the
Oh, it's
highway.
excitement. You leave the world behind you when you get on two wheels and
Yeah.
you take off and go, Keith, and that's the thing. Most everybody, it's a lot of people, and they've always talked about the excitement of freedom riding motorcycles and
Yeah.
the like, but it truly is. It's an amount of freedom that you don't get in a lot of ways.
No.
I mean, you can't. A convertible car is probably pretty cool, but it's not the same thing
No.
as riding a motorcycle. I've done a lot of cross country, a lot of long distance, iron butt runs,
Yeah.
things like that. And one of the things that's absolute when you're out there going, it's probably as close as you could be to have been riding, a horse pony express, trying to really cut across the country and blast along and cover a lot of distance in a short amount of time and get there a whole lot faster than what you could on a horse.
Yeah. That's very true.
So,
But
back to Kent,
Yeah.
we were talking about a second ago, in somewhere probably around late 1963 or thereabouts, he met with Wayman Gardner, which we've got a picture here. We kind of hold it up. This is Kent and Wayman down the road. This was after we moved over to this location.
Yeah.
Wayman Gardner was the Harley rep, and the motorcycle that they're standing by at the bottom, not the JD at the top.
Yeah.
But the knucklehead down there on the bottom, that was Wayman's motorcycle, and Wayman rode that motorcycle over here from Brownwood where he lived.
Yeah.
And that's where they signed the papers for the dealership, was on that motorcycle.
Holy cow.
Back in 1963. Now, we received official notification, and I've got a copy of that somewhere in my office.
Yeah.
But official notification, and our actual date of start was March 16th, 1964.
Oh, cool.
And so that's when we started. It was a very small shop down on Walnut Street around the 7800 block. The building's still there, but it's pretty run down. And then he later moved up the street to 900 block.
Yeah.
Right in there. Or actually 600 block, the 642 location.
Yeah.
And then we had a building across the street as well. And we were there till the late 90s. And then in 2000, June of 2000, we ended up moving to this location over here on South Clack.
Wow.
So it's been quite a ride to see the changes. When we were across town, when Kent and I got together in it would have been 87.
Why did y'all get to? I mean, like,
he was going to have. I had the Suzuki dealership at the time.
Yeah.
He was going to have his second heart bypass surgery.
Okay.
And knew he was going to be out for a while. Was expecting to be down. He was, like I said, I'm not sure exactly how old he was at the time, but he was late 60s, early 70s in that time frame, my age, and so he knew he was going to be down, and actually a mutual, a guy that had worked for David Dahlgren, the motorcycle community was pretty small, close knit.
Yeah.
But Larry Carey was working for him selling motorcycles at the time, and Larry I knew real well, and Ken had mentioned something about it, and Larry mentioned my name and about, possibly as a partnership there. And anyhow, Kent called me at home one day, and I was eating lunch, and called me, said he wanted to talk to me. And, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. Harley was not in the best mode at that time. They had recently been, bought out themselves, in 82, and they were kind of struggling along. And so I didn't know if that was a smart move or not, but, I thought about it, and we talked quite a bit, and ended up, here we are 37 years later. But
Wow, that's insane. I mean, because for you've done so much in your life, prior to owning a motorcycle shop and everything. And did you ever see yourself, going this route?
No, I'm a firm believer. We get put in situations
Yeah,
that are intended for us to go. Sometimes one door closes and you're not sure why it closed or why things happen that way. And, if you have an option, you have an option either kick the door open that's going to come your way or cry over whatever the spilt
yeah,
milk may be or whatever the case is. But, you know, um, it's obvious to me now why the doors open the way that they
oh
did
yeah,
because I can look back and see that, but at the time I wondered, at different times. Motorcycles. Now, 1979
yeah.
was the year the most motorcycles were sold in the United States. There's 1.2 million new motorcycles were
Why?
sold in the United States. That did not happen again until about 2000, 2001. After it did, they went into this pretty big lull
Yeah,
in the 80s, and in Abilene in Texas and across the country in general, we had the big oil,
yeah, yeah. The
drop
big
back
boom.
in the 80s,
Yeah,
yeah, and here locally and everywhere else, it didn't just take, oil field didn't just crash. It took banks out. Banks were crashing left and right in the 80s. Interest rates, of Jimmy Carter's era, interest rates were 18%.
yeah,
That's if you had decent credit.
yeah,
People were buying houses, paying 16, 17%. These young kids don't have the slightest idea of what it was like now.
yeah,
They've been weaned on 0, 1, 2, 3% interest rates, and interest rates were really high, and it was tough.
yeah,
It got really tough on everybody. Kent was an oil man. He was in the oil business, and he had some pretty lucrative and decent things. So it wasn't that he wasn't necessarily struggling like some of the others of us were. But the 80s were not a good time. Everything dropped, and when it
yeah.
dropped pretty radically. So
Right.
it was tough. If you didn't have, there wasn't Harley Financial and Honda Finance and all
Oh
these
yeah,
these companies that finance motorcycles individually out there, like it was. It was basically
yeah.
bank
Okay,
credit unions,
gotcha.
and with the banks doing what they were doing, man, you had to pretty much walk on water to be able to get a loan. So it got to be a little difficult in the 80s,
Yeah,
But if you love what you're doing, and that's one of the things that I found is I love motorcycles. Have since I was a kid. I was a kid that put one of my dad's playing cards in the spokes,
oh
and
yeah,
get my
yeah,
butt in trouble because I tore up his playing cards so it sounded like a motorcycle, my
yeah,
bicycle. I love him. I had an uncle, my Uncle Bob, still alive, lives up in Kansas.
yeah.
Was my mom's youngest brother. He was a motorcycle rider.
Okay,
And so every time, I go up and be around him, some I'd be around, he was always on bikes. And so it's one of those things that I've just had this love of two wheels and motorcycles since
yeah,
I was a young kid. And so it was just, when that just kind of came naturally when the opportunity sprung itself to get into the business
yeah,
in 1975. I moved into it and started with David Doggan at the Yamaha shop,
yeah,
and I was going to college and going through that whole ordeal to get that done. And of course, life throws you curveballs, and
yeah,
you just have to deal with them as they come. But it ended up taking me here, and so it's one of those things that if you try to plan, and I guarantee you, because I've planned and tried to plan things and do it, and most of the time plans never work out the way you want it to. You know that. I mean, you can always hope. So sometimes it's better to just kind of go with the flow of the river,
yeah,
and go with it. And it's been good. And there's been times I thought I was going to drown, but you just keep on going. So here it is, 49 years, literally.
yeah.
I will start my 50th year in the motorcycle business this July.
In July, that's
in
going to be
July.
your 50th year.
That'll start my 50th. Yeah.
Wow. So Kent's has been around for 61. You're about to start your 50th year in, in the motorcycle business. You've seen and heard it all.
A bunch of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it. I mean, and we know about the first motorcycle and everything, but do you remember the first motorcycle you personally sold?
No, not really. Yeah. Well, yeah, I do, but it was my own motorcycle. I
Oh,
sold to somebody else that I'd bought so I could buy another motorcycle.
yeah, I got you.
It was, going back, it's going back pretty good, but yeah, when I was in the Marine Corps, I bought a bike or two,
Yeah,
but that's most of them, a lot of people want to say their first motorcycle was a Harley, and there probably are a few that did, but honestly, if most people will really tell you the truth, they probably had a Honda or a Kawasaki Yamaha. They had something,
yeah,
to get started in. Everybody didn't just jump out there and buy, a big old hog and start riding it.
yeah,
They started out somewhere, and that's okay. A lot of people over the years, and you talk to them. A lot of people want to have an attitude, about hey, I'm this or that or whatever. But one of the there's bikers, there's motorcycle enthusiasts, and then there's
yeah,
just half-ass riders,
yeah,
that probably don't need a bike, but they're still riding.
yeah,
They're lucky they haven't crashed and killed themselves. But some people just don't need to have bikes.
yeah. No, I
Yeah,
understand that 100%.
kind of like guns. Some
Yeah,
people don't need to have guns. But one of the things uh, that I noticed is that the true hardcore, the really hardcore, and I want to use that as a term, as opposed to bikers or anything else. The true hardcore guys, they really didn't care what you rode as long as your hair was in the wind.
yeah, that makes sense.
Sure, that they weren't gonna, and I'm talking about guys that I'm talking about diehard bikers.
Yeah, yeah,
Some of them are clubbers, some of them not. But back in the day, when I first got into the Harley side of this, it's a, I said a while ago, it's a small circle of people in general, and
yeah,
back then it really was a small circle of people.
yeah,
When I first, I knew. I raced motocross and cross country and had drag bikes, all that stuff and the deal. So I was very attuned to the import side of the product.
yeah,
Everybody pretty much around knew who I was and what I did and the like. But when Kent and I got together, I had to literally prove myself to a lot of people that had been riding Harleys.
yeah,
Not so much as that, but that that I actually knew about motorcycles and I
right.
knew what was going on, and I'd had a couple of Harleys before, so it wasn't like I was totally out of touch with them. But it's there's some really diehard guys that was all they had.
Right.
That's all they used for transportation was motorcycles.
Yeah, yeah,
And Harleys. And those were the guys that after you get to know them and all, a lot of people think they're rough. All those are rough guys or they're dopers or they're whatever.
yeah,
Most of those guys are just really solid people.
yeah,
99% of them, they're solid, good folks. I would say there's very few people out there that I've met, over this last 49 years that are not good people in
right.
motorcycles. And that's, that they give you the shirt off their back.
That's 100% correct. Yeah.
They're kind. They like riding motorcycles.
Well, and yeah, and it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what your politics are. Doesn't matter who your favorite team is or anything. Once you get on a bike and you're out on the road with like-minded people,
Yep.
you become one. And I think that's really part of, I mean, the culture really has been the biggest playing part of, Harley's legacy, in my opinion. I mean, the bikes, don't get me wrong, the bikes are freaking awesome, but just the overall culture is really kept it alive.
And Harley, I think more so than anything else, has developed the family mentality.
Yeah.
Because if a lot of the guys on the sport bikes like the guys on the sport bikes, and the guys on, I mean, they kind of fall in their own realm because of the type of style that they, maybe that they ride or they do. But the one thing about the Harleys, if you buy, like for example, if on an import bike like a Going, if you go to, they used to have a Going Rider Association type deal. If you rolled up there and you weren't on the newest Gold Wing, they pretty much thumb your nose at you. I mean, they didn't have that mentality. If you go to a Harley event and some guy rides up on a 1940s, 50s, or 60s bike, everybody surrounds that thing.
Yeah.
It's cool that you don't have to have the newest, most spectacular bike out there. Having an older one that you know how to ride, you know how to run and operate and everything, that's probably as cool, if not more cool, than having a newer one sometimes.
No, I agree.
The family is big and it's expansive. And once you become a part of that and you become a part of that group, it's there. You don't see people running around with Honda tattoos, not nothing against Hondas. We sell them, but it's a lifestyle. And that's one of the things that really has served well. Everybody, every dealer, every motorcycle manufacturer out there has tried to copy Harley Owners Group, Hog.
Yeah.
And and it doesn't work.
No, you're right.
It has not worked. Every one of them has faltered and failed. The Harley Owners Group is still going after 40 years, and it's still active, but it's made up of people that like to ride motorcycles, and more miles annually are put on by Harley-Davidson motorcycles than probably any other brand that's out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because they ride.
Yeah.
And they go and they ride. Now, are there bikes that, probably could do, long haul rides, these really crazy rides out there may be better? I don't know. A lot of people would say that that's the case, but when you do an iron butt run on a Harley and you got all these guys do them on adventure bikes, they find out you do it on a Harley, like, you did that on a Harley?
Yeah.
And you're going like, yeah. And I was very comfortable in the process of doing it, So.
It's the way I look at it is, as long as you're riding, I mean, I'm diehard Harley, but, kind of going back to the old school mentality, I don't care. I like riding. I don't care what. Now I will throw a couple jabs because, with like the Honda Goldwing, like you're talking about, kind of, that's like the Cadillac of the Honda lineup. You just can't be as cool when you have a Goldwing owners group because GOG doesn't sound nearly as badass as Hog.
Yeah. Well, they've tried and at one time the Goldwing was a pretty good luxury touring bike.
Yeah.
But honestly, anybody, Honda decided that they needed to be more sport bike oriented, and so they tried to turn the Goldwing into a sport touring bike. And the sales just dropped like a rock.
Yeah.
And, Harley is actually truly the luxury touring motorcycle that's out there. There's not a better one.
No.
Everything that's on that motorcycle, and I'm prejudiced because that's what I have.
A little biased.
Yeah, that thing is it's so nice and smooth and everything about it running down the highway.
Yeah.
It is truly a bike you can get on and ride, 1,000 miles on it, get off and ready for a steak and a beer instead of looking for a hotel room and a hot shower.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, this is the debut episode of the podcast Riding Backroads. Steve Hood. I'm Keith Hayes. We're talking today about just motorcycles in general, but we're kind of focused on the history of Kent's Harley-Davidson. This is where we, record the show. Now, we're talking about some of the older motorcycles, how like you show up to a rally on a 1940 or 1950 bike and everybody's gathering around it. You've seen them all, whether it's one that got traded in or one that you owned or sold. What's been some of the most unique motorcycles you've seen come through Kent's, whether it's this location or the previous location?
Well, Kent was an avid collector.
Yeah.
At one time we had well over 300 antique motorcycles.
Holy.
Yeah.
Wow.
When he passed, and it was several years after he passed, we ended up selling a big chunk of them. We actually sold 6 18-wheeler loads of motorcycles and parts to Wheels Through Time Museum over
Wow.
in Maggie Valley. Dale Walker, who is passed now, but his
Yeah.
son Matt have been good friends of ours for years and years and years.
Yeah.
When Dale started the museum, a lot of the stuff that he bought came from our dealership because we had a large supply of old parts,
Yeah.
having been around for a long time.
Makes sense.
But we still have a 1920 JD up there on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
For people to come look at. But we had a lot of them on display. The family was is not as much into motorcycles,
Yeah.
as the rest of Kent's kids. But so we still have some, but we're down to probably 30 or less compared to what we did
Wow.
have. But they needed to go someplace to do it. But
Yeah.
we've had everything from we had a 1913 single cylinder that was basically the last of the pedal start. It had bicycle pedals that
That is so
you
cool.
had to pedal to make the thing
Yeah.
start and run. And then we had a 25 JD that we used in the movie The Stars Fell on Henrietta.
Yeah.
The Clint Eastwood movie that starred Robert Duvall and Francis Fisher, Agent Quinn, about the oil field back in the 20s.
That is so cool.
We used that in the movie. So there's been a ton of them. My favorite bike, probably that we still have, is the 64 Panhead. That was Kent's original motorcycle. That was his personal bike that he rode.
Wow.
And the last time he rode it, we were still at the old store, and Kent wanted to ride it. They said he was getting on up there. He was probably pushing 80 at that time, thereabouts. And he wanted to ride it. And I asked him, I said, can you start it? And he goes, no. I said, well, I'll get Steve Henderson's one of the techs. I'll get Steve to start it.
Yeah.
And I had Steve go with him on his motorcycle. And Kent got on the thing. He rode it about 15 minutes and came back. I just, and that was it. That was the last time that anybody rode it.
Wow.
But, we've got, Kent also liked the Indians. We've got an Indian Inline 4,
Yeah.
the last Indian we still have, which is one of the rarest of the Indians. And so, there's been a lot of motorcycles. We had a Benton Black Shadow.
Really?
That was, that was a really interesting bike, because that thing, if you ever take it apart, it's like a fine watch.
Yeah.
The way that they're designed and built is pretty cool. So, but they had no brakes. The thing would run 120 miles an hour, but you couldn't stop it. That was a problem with those. So, but it's been a blast to be around all these old bikes. And then a lot of guys that are still around. We still have a lot of old customers, and it's always a thrill when one of the old guys from the 60s,
Yeah.
and they're getting to be fewer and fewer. We're all getting older, but when one of the older guys comes around and stops in and says hi, and we've got several of them that still do, and then there's a bunch of them that have passed, and so we kind of try to honor that old tradition.
Yeah.
So the one thing about us here, compared to a lot of, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, I may write the checks to pay the bills,
Yeah.
but our customers are our bosses.
Yeah.
And I think too many in dealerships and all, they that's not what they believe. They're about whatever it may be, maybe whether it's the almighty dollar or whatever. But the thing is that we've got people that come back on a regular basis. We've got people that go. I ride motorcycles. I've had 30, 40 Harleys over the years. I've had a bunch of them, and I've got customers. I've got one customer that's bought probably 35, 40 Harleys since 1988.
Holy
Gets
cow.
a new one just about every year. But the customers are truly what makes our world go around. But then, us as the people that work in a dealership need to be motorcycle oriented folks as well.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest things that you run across, is you get people that want a job. And all they want's a paycheck, and they don't care,
Yeah.
about what goes on with it. So I'm very picky. I'm picky about the people that we hire. I want to make sure that those people share a similar mentality and are customer oriented.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work that way,
No,
It's
no.
always it's one of those things that every once in a while things don't work the way that you hope they do, but I'm a problem solver, and that's what I do.
Yeah.
When there's an issue, then I solve a problem. So
I came in, I've been here for 2.5 years now. So I came in like right, it wasn't the 60th anniversary, but it was leading up to it.
Mhm.
So, there was a lot of, there's a lot of talk of the history and the legacy of Kent's Harley-Davidson. So I really kind of I started, better, I guess, in a sense, better than a lot of people because, you know, years
Well,
past.
you've been a customer too, so you've
Yeah.
been around. You've been around some. It wasn't like you totally didn't have any
No,
knowledge.
you're exactly right. But
Yeah.
I got to really kind of jump into the heart of daily hearing about the
Mhm.
history and how important Kent's Harley-Davidson has been to the community and everything that you and Kent and Grady and all the others have done for the community. And it's really cool to see such, for lack of a better term, such a badass business. You've got all these historic businesses around here that have kind of made up the identity of this area of Texas. But it's really cool to see such a ballsy, such a badass business kind of spearheading the way and being, like the grandfathers just coolness here in Abilene and the
Well,
big country.
people, we have a large group of people that come up every morning and drink coffee.
Yeah.
And we have on our Saturday rides, we could have 30, 40 or more people, coming out to go ride on Saturday. And then on our party on the patios, we have, I think it's the last one, we had about 400 people
Yeah.
show up, for it. Being involved, and that's the biggest part of it. And Kent was always involved, always liked to be involved. So did Grady when he was still here. They like to be involved in community, and that's one of the things that I've been very blessed to have the opportunity to learn and be mentored by some good folks. And Kent maybe was the best because there's being in the oil field. Now, this is one of the things that he taught me. When Grady first came to work for us when we moved over here, uh, Kent told me not to help him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He said his office, he said, don't help him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, Kent, he doesn't know motorcycles. And I've been doing this for, I don't know, 30 years, give or take, by that time, quite a ways, 25 anyway. But, I'm like, I can understand it. And I'm like, but it makes no sense,
Yeah.
on what you told me to do. And he said either stands up or he falls down. And,
Yeah.
and I didn't comprehend necessarily what he was trying to do at the time, but the thing is it Kent was trying, I think, to show, and me even, one of the things is I've always been real adverse to, you can't fail.
Yeah.
That's a Marine in me, being an old Marine, Marine Corps just says, oh, you push forward, you don't fail, you go. And so I've always been kind of bullheaded and headstrong along those lines. But, one thing that Kent knew is that no good oil man ever did not fail.
Yeah.
Never. How many you drilled? I don't know how many dry holes before you hit a gusher.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and the resilience, of making sure that you continue, you keep pushing forward, even when things don't look the best. And that was one of the things that he wanted to make sure that that Grady understood was there was no, you don't have the option.
Yeah.
You don't have the option to fail. You go, you
Yeah.
continue, you push forward, you do whatever you have to do it, but you don't fail.
Yeah.
And if you do fall, it's okay. It's okay. You just don't stay on the ground. You get back up and you keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that was, from a business aspect, that was good, because when I ended up after Kent passed away, and then Grady got sick, and it was just me, and then I had a really good bookkeeper that took care of business and everything.
Yeah.
Well, she died.
Yeah.
All of this happened pretty close into a certain time frame. Well, I knew the business, but I didn't really know the business.
Right.
In other
Right.
words, what it every day doing, because she took care of most of it.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do is I had to fall back on my accounting background that I had from college, and I had learned to be an accountant. I had to go back to work instead of just sell motorcycles and have fun. And so, and it would have been real easy to have just thrown my hands up and said, no, this is more than I want to deal with.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and we pushed on through, and same with COVID. When COVID hit, a lot of businesses ended up having problems. We actually ended up doing better through the COVID time frame than we had done,
Yeah.
before. So, it's just kind of one of them things. But yeah, resilience. And it was one of the things that Kent was trying to make sure that he understood. And
Yeah.
Kent was a very, very smart individual. He was a sharp guy.
He really was. I never worked for him. I knew him obviously in my previous life and everything, and had quite a few times to mingle with them, and incredibly intelligent, but very quick-witted too. He was not one to let you if he caught you slacking, he's going to let you know.
He was sharp. He was sharp all the way up until he when I guess he was probably about 91 or 92,
Yeah.
and had an incident where he ended up cutting his foot, and that didn't go real well, and ended up with a lot of problems. And once he went in a wheelchair, that was all over. It was just a matter of months.
Yeah.
It just got weaker and weaker and weaker. But no, he was a good man. He was definitely been good to me in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole. I don't know of too many people that would consider that, he wasn't.
Yeah, like I said, I never worked for the guy. I knew him, but didn't know him nearly as well as you and many others in this shop. I think the two things, and you hit on one specifically, and the other kind of tiptoed around it, but the two things that I've learned through you as my mentor, about Kent, your mentor, our family, the importance of family and perseverance. That seems to be, is that an accurate assessment?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Because Kent he considered us, everybody that worked for him, to be family.
Yeah.
It's he would, there'd been people that, good grief, I would just assume to be gone down the highway, but Kent wouldn't fire them because they were part of family.
Yeah.
I actually won. I don't know if you were on the radio back then when I did it, but back in it probably would have been in the early 90s.
Yeah.
The radio station put this deal on and said, who's the best boss in the world and why?
Yeah.
And so I called up there and I said, well, I have absolutely the best boss. Nobody has ever been fired from Kent's.
Wow.
Ever. I ended up winning a CD, I think, at the time or something. But Kent he was always interested in the way that things were, as far as the way it was his.
Yeah.
But being older now, I see things a whole lot differently than I did when I was your age or in my 40s, or in the like 30s. I realize that life is a whole lot more than just, coming to work and doing, your daily in and out stuff. And then, and people have lives and people have problems in those lives. And, it doesn't always throw you what you want. It sometimes throws you the things that you don't want.
Yeah.
And trying to help folks deal through that and the like. And so I try in a lot of ways to be, more like what Kent was in the business aspect. And my dad, who's passed away fairly recently, was also a very, he was the kind of guy that my cousins would come and talk. And I couldn't hardly talk to him as a kid, but then it's different being, your dad. But, my friends could talk to him, and all my cousins would come talk to him. He was the baby of his family,
Yeah.
but he had to be kind of tough on me, I guess, is what he thought. But after I grew up and I was able to have a really good relationship with him, I understood more about how he was and the like. And he was a very compassionate and kind-hearted guy.
Yeah.
And so, I really tried over the years to embrace some of the things that these folks have that I've learned. And it's not always, easy. Sometimes
Yeah.
you have to look at it from the hard, side of what business tells you to do. But
Right.
but it's still I don't know. I'm probably more prone to err on the side of kindness than I would be to just be a horse's butt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I can attest to that.
so
I've witnessed that firsthand. This podcast, it's the debut episode of Riding Backroads, giving a little background into Kent's Harley-Davidson, the dealership in which we record this show and everything. And we plan on covering lots of topics, myth-busting Texas motorcycle laws. We'll talk about our Harley owners group and so much more. But this is going to be a fun little time for Hood and I to chat it up and hopefully have fun with you guys as well. So follow us on all the socials, like, subscribe, and do all that good stuff. And if you've got some topics or whatever or suggestions for Riding Backroads, let us know. But I got to tell you, it's always an honor to hang out and listen to you. You're kind of like my Yoda, mainly just because you're an old fart.
yeah, getting there.
No, seriously, Hood is like my Yoda. I guess I'm the Luke Skywalker that was the asshat that really wasn't listening to the Force at the time. But we're gonna have some fun with this podcast and everything. But man, appreciate some of your insight into the background of Kent's and kind of where it brings us at to today.
Yep. Well, it's a blast, and hopefully hope y'all all enjoy it. And like he said, if there's things that you'd like to hear us talk about, I know that we've still got some of the, like we talked about earlier, some of the old customers.
Yeah.
Flat track was a real big thing back in the '60s, and we still got some. We're going to try to round up some of these old guys and let you get to visit with some of this stuff and give you some interesting things to visit on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Riding Backroads. Appreciate you guys joining us today.